back to the Berg podcast. Thanks for joining us today. With me today is Ford.
Hey, how's it going?
And Dan.
Hey, everybody.
And today we're talking about the difference between dream clients and reality. And I think like a lot of businesses, we've got kind of like the picture, some semblance of what is the perfect client. Like you know, if we had our pick all day long, every day, that's what we want every time. And then there's kind of the reality of the fact that, well, not every client can be the dream client. And I think sometimes our folks don't necessarily understand the why the decision gets made or how the decision gets made. Right?
And it's not one thing. It's not linear in the sense of why we make the decision. It's not, there's not like a checklist of orders. So, part of it has to do with workload and backlog and what's available and all those things and what you're looking at.
Yeah.
And then how many. Obviously, you're still trying to get as many of these key metrics, as you want in terms of having worked with people before, having some experience with them, a job you like in terms of, the makeup of what you want to do in places you want to do it, all those sort of things that we always talk about. But it's not linear. It's not like I look at it and there's 10 choices and then we narrow it down. It's like a draft. It's not like a draft because I'm not picking in essence. So we have to get to a number that can work and that work for us, and when you do that, you make different choices. So a lot of times we look at location. It's being really important, right? For what the travel is, what the distance is, all that sort of stuff. And then you'd look at, you'd look at job makeup. So actual client probably is the third in the things that we consider, but it's what becomes probably the most impactful to the team once you're there, because a lot of that has to do with how the client carries themselves and the relationship between us and the client as we go into that job.
Yeah.
Well, it's a lot. Go ahead.
I was going to say a lot of it, you're right, is like dream job and then finding the right client to do dream jobs for. Is that sort of what you're alluding to?
Yeah. Because I think we have managed to do that a few different times in special projects, and going back to before special projects existed, you know what I mean? Like Ford found a client that was a really good client working in the area, in the work he wanted, everything just lined up. And so it became a natural fit. And Scott's found a few of those after the fact, where we've added people in and we do a lot of work for them and it works well. They know what to expect from us. We know what to expect from them. We know who to talk to. They know who to talk to, all those things. And they're doing the work we want to do. And in that scenario, that's where you really end up in that dream client scenario, because then it just becomes a matter of when the work is available that you need to do the work, so they have work that needs to be done. We have to do work and we both want to work with each other. So now it's just a matter of getting to the job that makes the sense in terms of schedule and the dollars. And then it's a go, and that works really well and creates a lot of comfort for the whole team, everybody from, the laborer to Ford himself. There's a comfort level.
Well, the other thing is too, that we are a subcontractor. Like that is the nature of our business.
Right.
So like where we are in the flow of things is very particular in that, we're not at the top of the chain. Or maybe sometimes we're one off the chain. Maybe we're 3 or 4 links down the chain. It all depends on the project. And so like, I think the interesting thing with the dream project or the dream, we say client, but really it's a dream project or whatever the scenario is that there's so many elements that play ball in there. And some of it, back when I was on social media, they're always funny, like the social media post versus the reality, or, making sure the angles are right and the colors are right and all that stuff, that whatever. But that's some of the reality of what, so like when we talk about those dream ones, there's so many of those other factors involved because, when we're bidding a project, depends on the project. So in the commercial world, there's a project out there. There might be 5 GCs bidding it, right? And then so each of the 5 GCs might have 5 site contractors bidding it. You do the math, there's 25 potential bidders on that project. So, by the whittling down of that, like it is so unique. We always talk about like if you had enough where you could say like, you could say no. Usually what we try and do is say no to ones that we know are definitely not for us, even before we spend the time on them. It's not that getting down to the last minute where it's like ready for contract and then you say no. You'd rather say no earlier in the process, so you don't waste a lot of that front end pre-construction time, because that takes a lot of cost and time to do all that front stuff there. But the reality is that when you get down to it, and then the other part that's interesting is that the owners a lot of times are not the same people. You know, the client might be the same people, but they're working for different people. So, you know, each one of those factors just play into it. And then we also joke about it with like different clients, you know, just like sometimes we have different team members with us. They might have different people working for them. So we might have had a really great experience with their one project manager. That person moves on. We had a good experience. Maybe somebody new moves in and maybe it gets worse or better. The devil you know versus the devil you don't. So all of those factors play into it. And it is interesting too, part of like the flow. Like one thing that construction has gotten, I'm not sure if it's better or worse, but just because the consistency matters so much. Like in the old days, you know, you might be, I remember people we worked with when I was working with my dad, like, you know, they might be home for 2 weeks because the next job didn't start. Now people want more consistency than that. They want to be continuously working. And so that flow can't be there. You need to keep that, you know, you can't have those 2-week gaps in the middle of August. People aren't like, oh yeah, we got vacation time. They're like, no, I like my paycheck. So that's changed. Seasonality, you know, used to have the 9 or 10 month work season. It's now a 12-month work season. So that's changed. So all these factors come into play and allow you to, you know, I think the other thing is it's called a dream job or dream client because everything has to line up. But life is never really a dream unless you have a nightmare sometimes. No. But so I mean,
wake up.
Yeah. But the reality is that like, if you're looking at that and you're like, oh, this doesn't match up 100%, you know, there might be one in every 5 to 10 years that's going to match up 100%. So if you can get to 75%, good.
Right.
You know, anything under 50%, that's probably not a good thing, but there's a nice big variable in there between what is a no and what is a dream. And a lot of things that can be very successful in between there. They don't all have to be on one side or the other. They can be somewhere in the middle.
Yeah. And we sort of talked through this a little bit, I think, you know, separately, or previously, I should say. We talked through this, and it was funny. I gave a landfill example, and we're not going to get into it. And I just said, you know, I think, Brian, you remember I said before, I said, if you had to pick one landfill client, who is it? And we both knew who it was, like right away. And it's funny, it's not somebody we've done a lot of work for, but it was just the relationship was so easy. And there's other people that we've done a lot of work for, and they're varying degrees of difficult to work with, but we're successful, right? So it's this odd thing is what is a dream or nightmare scenario. And even, you know, if you're cruising along and we're feeling good and Berg's feeling strong top to bottom, I think a dream job would be a different thing to Ford, to me, and to you. You know what I mean? The three of us would have a different idea of what a dream job is. You know what I mean? I like just between you and I might have very little care for how much front money there is. You know what I mean? I don't care that it's a ton of materials or a ton of subs. I don't care. Job's great. I like working for these people. We're going to do very well. You know what I mean? Whereas for you, I know that when we talk a lot of times, you're like, well, if we don't have to outlay and finance the project, it makes it a lot easier for you to do your job, you know? So that's the other funny thing. And, you know, you take the field guys, there might be a job that is really good for you and really good for me. And then the guys go there and they're like, this job is really difficult, you know, like the conditionally difficult, you know, there could be issues with the soil conditions or the surroundings or the space or any number of things which make the job difficult, but didn't necessarily impact my and your view of how it would run, of if it would be successful and if it would be profitable. So we might say like, oh, that was a dream job. And there's the guys say like, that was a nightmare job, you know?
Yeah.
And similarly, there's jobs that we do that when they're done, you look at them and it's like, that's an amazing project. It was no fun. It was rough. But when it's done, you look at it and you be like, that's an amazing project.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
And so it's such it depends on who you ask what a dream job is. And as you've both said, the actual dream jobs are so few and far between, because that's a job that the people were happy to go do. The client was happy to have us do it. And we did it successfully in a window that we didn't feel pressure to have to start early or finish early, you know, and we were just allowed to complete the work and work through and find solutions and get the job done.
Right.
That's a lot of things to have happen for everybody to feel good about a project for the duration.
Yeah.
Well, the other factor that comes into play is that, you know, some work we do, like for municipalities and stuff, is low bid no matter what, right? And so we put in a bid it might look like a wonderful job, but somebody else might have thought it was even more wonderful and decided to do it for, if we're real close and we lose a job, that's life. I mean, we all looked at it the same way. But I remember there's jobs we've looked at years ago. I still remember it, and we're sitting there, and there was this material project to move material from one place to the other, and you and I are both at the pre-bid, and the guy raised his hand, and he asked a question. He said, well, if we do it for $1, and it was asked about swell factor or something like that. If we do it for $1, do we get extra for the swell? And we're like, oh, okay, he's just using a number just because, like...
He's just saying $1.
He's just trying to use it because he's not going to say it's $3.24. He's just using $1 for round figures. And someone came in and bid $1.
The person who said it bid $1.
$1.
Yeah,
and I think we were like $8.74. It was rate. It was a bunch of different factors.
It was a bunch of different things,
and whether they were successful or not doesn't matter to us.
Doesn't matter.
But like, we couldn't do it for that. Somehow they figured it out. Whether they did or didn't figure it out, they got the job. They moved on. Yeah. Negotiate's a little different as far as, you can talk back and forth. You can try and work through those details. But on the stuff that we're bidding for municipalities and things like that, that is, you got one shot. The cool part is, immediately whether you got the job or not.
The scary part for it is,
you know
immediately if you got the job or not. You know what everybody else was.
You also know
what
how everyone else saw it. Yeah.
Another one along those lines, as we talk about, jobs, and it's a job we didn't get, was back with Ted. You remember the job with Ted Jacobus? I don't think you were at the pre-bid, but you might have been. It was a West Pikeland job for Walnut Lane Park. And I think it was actually the rebid. I think it had been bid and the numbers came in high and they didn't have the money to do it and they wanted to do the whole job. Eventually the job got phased a little bit and they haven't yet done the final phase of it. But I remember in some semblance of that meeting, somebody said like, well, if it was overbid, because they couldn't tell you how much it was, how much money they had, but somehow they got to an answer and somebody said some ridiculous number. I remember it was $800,000 and somebody won the job at $798,000. And it was like, that's insane. Like that. I mean, I think the same company had bid 1.5, like 6 months earlier on the same job, and they just decided to take a lot of risk on themselves.
Well, that's another variable that comes into play is that, especially in the last couple of years, because we've all know costs unfortunately have gone up for everybody, from buying bread to anything else. But clients, it might be a great job, but they might just cancel the job or rebid. You might be the low bidder and they rebid the job and things change, don't change. Like that happens too. I mean, I don't know how many times we've done that. Like, we're the winner. Oh, we're just going to cancel the project because we decided not to do it or the township moved the money to somewhere else. And you're like, did all that work, won the bid at a number we were comfortable with, and they just nixed the job.
And you still
and it still wasn't what they wanted, right? Or it didn't fit their box. Right. So
it's so funny when you're on like the bidding websites, everyone's always asking what the engineer's estimates are. And a lot of people won't release it, which I'm not sure why, because the reality is if they, from their side, are expecting X and everybody comes in at Y, the job's not going to happen. So I guess they're hoping that if the engineer estimate someone's going to come in low under that, but majority of times, especially in the last couple of years, the books that they use to come up with these numbers haven't caught up, and so they see a lot of things that aren't in their expectation range.
Yeah, for sure. I love that social media analogy you used a few minutes ago, because I think that that the problem with social media is like a lot of things, you're looking at like a snapshot that's been doctored up, right? It's the perfect angle.
It's your wedding pictures.
Perfect scenario. The lighting was right. And if not, you could use a filter in Photoshop or whatever else you wanted to do to make it look the way you wanted it to look, right? And that's like the perfect example, I think, of what we're talking about, because like there are in moments snapshots of what could be or what is perfect. But the amount of variable involved, like both of you have mentioned, is it's just hard for anything ever to go exactly the way you had dreamt it would, hoped it would, etc.
Even planned it.
Doesn't always mean it goes bad, but it's not usually ever the same, right?
Well, I think, and it probably isn't really true, but it feels true to me, that I could sort of in that scenario, I could show you, we could post and share pictures of projects that are done and will be done soon and will be done in the future. Mm-hmm. that you would say that is the most amazing project? That's the best project you guys ever did. And I would tell you it's probably the most
challenging.
You know what I mean?
Sure.
Like unsuccessful, and not unsuccessful that it didn't get done, but at the end of the day, we're in business. You know what I mean? And we need to be able to be profitable. And it might be the most unsuccessful job. And I can show you some jobs where it looked like we did nothing that the client would say was super successful and we made money. You know what I mean? Like it's the crazy, it is kind of crazy when you think about it, that because that is what we want. At the end of the day, make no mistake, almost every contractor wants the client to be really happy with the product that they bought, with the service that they bought, with what they got, and to have made money. Right? That's you don't have to have beaten somebody to death.
That's a dream job
That's
right
a
there.
dream job. I mean, that's when you make it simple. A dream job's really simple. It's a happy client who would want you to work for them again that you made money. That's a good job.
Right.
You know, but what that looks like, that can be completely different. You know, I mean, we've done jobs where we had to hammer rock and the client was really upset. And we've done jobs where we had to hammer rock and the client was really happy. You know what I mean? And it wasn't a difference in money. It was a difference in the client's expectation of understanding what they were paying for.
Right.
And some of that falls on us, you know, I mean, and that's where communication becomes so important is if you can't communicate with the client what it is that needs to be done as soon as you know it effectively and why, and they feel like they're not being taken advantage of, you're going to have a problem. But if you can, and they're reasonable and they, you know, they understand that's the way it is. It's just, Ford talks about it. We've talked about it so many times that when you go to do, you know, when you're doing electrical or plumbing, you know, or putting windows in a building, like there's 42 holes in that building where windows have to go. You're going to need 42 windows. You're not going to put 42 windows in and be like, as it turns out, you need 57 windows. Like you needed 42. You need X amount of outlets. You need this sink. You know, there's not a lot of variable once you make the decision what you want or code demands, you know, whatever those things are. But with us, we always say it. The problem is you drew a plan about something you didn't know. The only way you could have known is if you built the whole thing first, then filled it back in, and then we did it after the fact. You're hoping that the conditions are good and that nothing external impacts them. And I think that's what makes it so hard for clients, you know. And so, you know, probably the biggest piece, if we want to have dream clients, is for us to effectively communicate in a fair time frame to get them the information and tell them what we know.
Well, so sometimes I talk to people that might potentially be clients, and they're not related to construction, but they need a building or they need something like that, and I might just be chatting with them. And I said, like, you know, I always tell them, whatever your number is, make sure you have a 20% buffer. And they're always like thinking that, you know, all of us are out there trying to get that 20% buffer from them. But it makes their job so much more stress-free because if they do have a 2% adjustment, you know, we've noticed if you're working for a client and like they're at their capacity, at their budget, it makes it difficult for them. It makes it difficult for everybody because they realize that they don't have any more resources to cover the difference.
Yeah.
That's where it becomes a challenge. So, you know, if it's a $2 million job, plan on 2.4 and hopefully you don't need it, but at least that way you got that buffer there so that way if something does come up, you can make the decision, move it quickly. The quicker it moves through, quicker the job gets done. And, you know, maybe you save a little bit on it too. But that's always something that when you're talking to people, they're just like, why? And it's like, because there's unforeseen things that are going to happen on this project from everywhere, every source, especially in the last couple of years. And if you don't have that capacity for that little extra or design it down a little bit, whatever the scenario is, it just makes everybody stressed because everyone's at that brink and that breaking point, which makes things usually a little bit more less friendly to deal with.
And that's where I think one thing that I do believe that I've seen over the course of us doing this work the last, you know, 10 plus years for me, 20 years for Ford doing this, is that when you're working for the owner, it becomes so much easier because when you're working for somebody selling something, right? If you have a spec, you're building a spec building, a spec anything, it has to be it's going to cost you X, you're going to sell it for Y, that's your profit. If it costs more to make it, it doesn't mean that you sell it for more. You know, so whereas when you're working directly for an owner who's trying to get to an end, that thing that you're making in theory will yield them something. If it's a house, they'll be able to use it. You know what I mean? If it's a building. They're going to be able to manufacture or fabricate whatever it is they're doing or whatever it is that occurs in that building, and that will make money over time.
Mm-hmm.
So even if they have the contingency, a lot of times when you're dealing with an intermediary or with somebody who's selling something, that contingency is where they make money. So they don't want to dip into the contingency, even though it's there. And so it becomes a struggle because you're taking money out of someone's pocket to give it to you versus where Ford's saying, if you thought it was going to cost $2 million and you budgeted 2.4, then if you got it for 2.2, you have 200 extra.
Right.
But in modern society, Ford's a big fan of Dave Ramsey. In like modern society, that's not how it runs. It'd be like, okay, I'm going to spend 2.4 and I only have 2. We'll like figure it out. You know what I mean? That's what everybody does. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like that's what people do. That's why so many people are on credit so much. You know what I mean? Buying stuff on a personal level, like personal finance. You know what I mean? Why everybody has so much debt is because you want more than what you can afford. And then, then people would say like, oh, well, the credit card companies are killing me with debt or the interest rates are too high. I was like, well, if you didn't have that much debt, it really wouldn't impact you. That's where Ford's Dave Ramsey beliefs come in, that if you don't have any debt, nobody owns you. It really doesn't matter what happens around you. You can afford to live.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've noticed that we had one client where they were going to use the building. So they had a bunch of stuff they found there. But for them, the value wasn't the building. The value was the space under roof because they were going to be doing something there. So the cost of the building was just a long-term expense. But they weren't moving out. They weren't trying to flip it to anybody. They weren't doing anything else. All they were doing is like, their big push was, when can I start manufacturing in this facility?
When
That's
can
all
I
they
use the space,
yes,
right? I need the space.
All they could care about was they needed that space.
Yeah.
Because to them, any of the issues that arose were just time issues. They were not dollar issues. They were like, how quickly can we make this fix? How quickly? And so it moved much smoother through that because of that scenario in their mind, what they were trying to do with the place versus sometimes other things are going that way, because we were talking about it earlier and I said like links on the chain. There's some projects you might be 10 links down the chain because the developer's involved, the owner's involved, the construction manager's involved, the general contractor's involved. And then the owner might have a tenant coming into that building too. So, I mean, by the time you get to us, and we are in a service business, like, making our clients happy gets us repeat business, gets us all that stuff. And what is happy is determined by each person and each client. So you can't really say, but that is our business, is getting more repeat business by doing a good job. However it might have come out, that is unfortunately that's the target. And as long as you keep that in mind, all the rest of the stuff kind of just falls by the wayside.
Mm-hmm.
It does. And the foreman has so much to do with it. Like, the reality is the team in the field.
Boots on the ground.
Boots on the ground is what determines client satisfaction. You can have projects go exactly the same way operationally, but depending on how the owner feels based, or the point of contact feels based off of our interactions, that can change whether the job was a success in their mind or not a success.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So the reality is, it's always up for grabs.
And it's always us. No matter what job we go after, I feel like we think we have a fighting chance of this being a really good job.
Right.
We have to be optimistic at all times.
And then we have to do a good job,
right,
from the estimating team handing it off to the project management team, from the project management team's interaction with the foreman and the boots on the ground, and those three's interaction with the owner. If you do that, you will likely have a really good job, and it'll be like a dream job, And
right.
I've had bids that were not great, that I missed stuff, and the team turned it into a great job.
Right.
It was successful from a business standpoint. It was successful from an owner standpoint. It was successful from a team standpoint. And I've had really good bids that I feel like didn't turn out the way they should have, because it just, something in that chain didn't go right. And there was a disconnect, and we lost ground on it.
Yeah. The dream job and the dream client exists, but most of it is us controlling our own destiny along the way.
You should get a t-shirt with that on it.
Yeah. You might have to shorten it a little bit.
Yeah, that's a long
we're
one.
big guys, so you could
Can
fit
you
that
fit
on
that
a
on a
t-shirt.
hat? I don't know. Yeah. What's the acronym? So, That's probably a fair place to wrap it up. I think that's another one we could talk about for a long time, what those perspectives are and how the variables impact it. But I think the reality is the Instagram snapshot isn't always the truth, but there often is silver lining as long as, like you said, communication and doing things with intention and purpose happen. So thanks for joining us today, folks. We hope you got something from this, and we hope you come back for another episode.